Thank you so much. One of the most beautiful attributes of the human experience is the ability to see life. But even more beautiful is the ability to choose how we see life. I created this photo after I finished work on my first book, This Is How It Feels. So I know what it means to me, and it means quite a bit. But what I love most about this particular photo is that it means so many different things to so many different people. Some people look at it and they see it as heartbreaking, reminiscent of a suicide note. Other people look at it and they think it's a beautiful, heartfelt love letter. I think in order for us to really see an experience in its entirety and give ourselves the opportunity to make it our own, we have to apply balance. And what's most important for me in balance is balance of the mind and balance of the heart. Or to take it even further, to think and to feel. The first time in my life, my first memory of recognizing how important balance was when I was 8 years old. I had just gotten home from school, and it was my chores to do the dishes. No one else was at the house but me. And I remember standing in front of the sink, and in the bottom was a large chef's knife. The thought of what that could do and how it could hurt me was actually attractive to me. And life was very difficult for me at 8 years old. My house that I was growing up in sometimes saw unbelievable bouts of violence. I had a rocky relationship with my mother, an even worse one with my stepfather, and my dad was just filled with empty promises. To make things even more difficult for me, I was being sexually abused by a mentally handicapped man in our neighborhood. The majority of these incidences actually occurred in a crawl space beneath my house. There were times that I remember vividly lying in the dirt while these things were happening to me, and I could hear my family on the floor above me. What really brought it to another level, though, and I personally think this is part of the worst of it, he had tried these things with other people in our neighborhood, other kids. They had different coping mechanisms. They were stronger than me, and he wasn't successful. But because they knew what was happening and what he was about and that I was spending time with him, they picked on me for being abused. I was being made fun of for what was going on in my life. At 15 years old, I faced the most important day of my life. I was brought to a psychiatrist's office for the first time ever. I started telling him about these symptoms that I had, where I felt like I had to walk perfectly centered in a straight line down the sidewalk or the street or wherever I was, and if I veered left or veered right, then something horrible was going to happen, and it would be my fault. And I had to open my textbooks to a certain number, and if it didn't land on that number, then something terrible was going to happen. I had to line everything up perfectly and balance it out all in a really ritualistic way. Before I could even finish telling him what was going on, he said, "You have OCD, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a chemical imbalance in your brain. The depression and anxiety you're feeling with that are residual effects. We have medication for that. Next patient." I'm 42 years old today. I have a wife that I can truly say is my partner in life. I have 2 beautiful little girls. And I have a list of accomplishments that I am so proud of in life. But I can tell you that at 15 years old, when I walked into that doctor's office for the first time, that was by far the most important day of my life. Because I stood there with my guard down, completely vulnerable in the one place I was told I could get help. And I wasn't even a person to him. I wasn't even a diagnosis. I felt no more significant than a 10 o'clock appointment. That day had the potential to change my entire life. And I want to be clear, I'm not holding blame. I don't look back and say, damn him or anything like that. It was my decision after that experience to not give the mental health system a chance. So, though I did get treatment. I continued on this path of, I want you to see this picture. Thank you. I continued on this path of depression and anxiety and the OCD and the symptoms that were getting out of control and the thoughts of suicide that stayed with me since the time I was 8 years old never went away, not for a second. In fact, the way I talk about it is that suicide was the first thing on my mind. It was the filter in which everything needed to go through in order to come into me or leave from me. It was the solution to every single problem I had, regardless of how significant or insignificant it was. But depression, you take suicide, couple that with depression, there's a little bit of a misconception with depression. A lot of people believe that it narrows your focus, that it gets things real small and tight. And that's true, but there's more to it. Depression, for me, actually changed my thoughts to be very, very conceptual. See, I didn't look back on my life and say good days and bad days. I didn't look back and see moments where I was abused and moments where I wasn't. I look back on my life and I say, I was molested, I was abused, and I stamp that into the ingredients that made up who I was as a person. I was bullied. I had mental health issues, huge conceptual thoughts that made up my past, that encompassed everything for me, and all the good days dissolved away. And when you put that inside of a suicidal mind, the only thing I had to forecast my future, to predict my tomorrow, was my past. So all I did was throw it on the other side of me. And then you try to live in this little space, and that's where it gets narrow, and that's where it gets hard. Eventually, that balance that I had where I had a hard time thinking about life and using my mind and what was real and what wasn't, and the passion I felt in my heart that said it was okay and things were going to change, eventually that started to dissolve. I made a very real attempt to end my life at age 20. I spent the next 3 days in the intensive care unit. They had needles in my skin, monitors all over me, tubes down my nose and throat, and I was restrained to the bed because everyone who came in to help me, I tried to fight. On the last day, I was about to be released and sent to a psychiatric hospital. My brother had come in. It was kind of late in the evening. My brother and I are very, very different people, you can see. He's all left brain. He's a very successful businessman. He thinks with logic and fact and figures, and things have to make sense. And I think with my heart and emotion and passion. So our communication gets very difficult sometimes, especially in a moment like that. And I'm laying in the bed in ICU. Neither of us know what to say to each other. And my brother finally looks over and he asks me, what's it going to take to make you want to stay? I've told the story 100 times, and that question hits me every single time because I could not give him an answer. I could have given you 100 reasons of why I wanted to die, but I couldn't give you one of why I wanted to live. So, over time, I let that question, his question, become my question. And I realized, people ask me, like, where did you transform? Was there a tipping point? Was there a corner? How did you get from that person to this person? There was no one epiphany that happened, but if there was a point where I can locate a turn, it was in finding the answer to that question. All I wanted in life, what would have made me want to stay, it wasn't finances, it wasn't good health, it wasn't family or job or anything. All I wanted was just to be okay. The bare minimum, to wake up in the morning and be okay with waking up. To not be so damn scared of what might happen next. I think realizing that told me I was at my lowest point. And making myself aware that I had truly hit the deepest I'd ever want to go made me decide that I needed to move forward. But I'll tell you, I'm not a big guy on language and stuff. I know there's a lot associated with suicide prevention and mental health. I respect it and I honor it and I adhere to it, but I don't really think too much about it. But there is one word that I have a big issue with, and we use it often. It's recovery. See, recovery implies, even in its meaning, recovery says that everything was okay and then it broke, or there was a trauma, or something went horribly wrong, and now we have to put that back together. I refuse to believe that my life was a broken mess. I refuse to accept that the issues I went through, the molestation and abuse and all the stuff that I did, was broken, and I need to fix that some way. Michelangelo, one of the greatest artists in all of history, when asked how it was that he created such beautiful sculptures, he replied, "I saw the angel in the marble, and I carved until I set him free." I never aimed to recover on my path of wellness. I aimed to become. One of the first things I needed to do was to understand where I was. I needed that why, the why question that we have associated with so many people who consider suicide and attempt suicide and die by suicide. Why did I do what I had to do? And I know that that is a very, very complicated question. I take nothing away from the complicated severity of the suicidal mind. But in order for me to accept it, in order for me to make it mine and be able to move on, I had to simplify it in its most basic terms. The reason I think I attempted suicide and why so many other people do is because I wanted something to change and I felt incapable of changing it. And now that something is different for everybody. Everyone has their own issues and their own things that they would like to change. But for me, it was life. It was everything. And realizing all these things about my life, I recognized that life had changed. I wasn't that 8-year-old kid in my kitchen. I wasn't hiding under the covers from a violent outburst in the other room. I wasn't under my house in a crawl space being abused. Life had changed. But in all the things that had changed, there was one thing that stayed the same. Me. I had never changed. So the reality is, I needed to change and wanted to change so badly that I was willing to die for it. Why hadn't I done it? Why hadn't I changed? I can tell you, in my path of wellness, I've learned a lot of things, but one of the things I think is most important is honesty. If we ask the questions of ourselves and we find the answers for ourselves, we are forced to be honest. I can tell the doctors anything they want to know. I can tell my family anything to make them back up. But I cannot lie to myself, and you cannot lie to yourself. The reason I hadn't changed is a two-part answer, and they're both equally as difficult to admit. One, I liked it. I liked it. As dark as it was, as damaging as it was, as horrible of an experience that it was to be at that level of depression for that long, it was my identity. It was mine. I could look somebody in the eye and say with absolute conviction that you have no idea what it's like to be me, and I was right. Don't take that away from me. The second part is I was scared. I didn't know what it was like to be engaged in life. I didn't know what it was like to be confident, to stand in front of a room full of people and put my heart on the stage. The reality is, I had nothing to be afraid of. Absolutely nothing. And I can tell you, if you've experienced thoughts of suicide, if you've ever been down there, if you've ever attempted suicide, I promise you, it will never get worse than that. It can't. That's the bottom. And you have nothing to be afraid of anymore. Anything you do to improve on yourself is in the right direction. It's going to take you up, but it is definitely not going to bring you deeper. If I was going to move on with my life, I had to accept everything that was around me. All of these experiences that was my stone, my block of marble, everything behind me that needed to be dissected and analyzed. If I'm going to move forward in life and I look at what exists within these experiences, the first one I took is the abuse, the sexual abuse. Absolutely huge and so significant and so damaging. When I look at that block of stone, how in the world is there magnificence inside of that? But I literally thought about it day and night, and I broke it down, and all the things it gave me, self-confidence issues, trust issues, relationship issues, are those the things I want to bring to the surface? Definitely not. I'm letting that fall to the ground. And inside there, inside that experience, what I learned, what I find beautiful, is compassion. I learned what it's like to be empathetic. The way I write about it in my book is that compassion is to see the hurt in the eyes of another, no matter how badly we are hurt ourselves. If going through that experience is what I had to do in order to embrace that level of compassion in my heart and love myself for it, then that experience is no longer dark, and it's no longer impenetrable, and it's somehow made beautiful. I looked at mental health issues. My God, there were so many times in my life where I would lay completely shattered on the floor, unable to physically stand up because of what was happening in my mind. Maybe in some weird way, I don't know, maybe struggling with mental health issues the way I did was one of the most quickest and efficient ways to self-discovery I could have ever asked for. I spent years of my life recognizing every single thought that entered my mind, breaking it apart, managing it, manipulating it, compartmentalizing it. Where else would I have gotten an opportunity like that? I think in my whole life, I've worked to implement balance in everything that I've done. And the mental health field is certainly no exception to that. We have a very heavy-weighted side of science and facts and academics, and we need that. I take nothing away from that. I give it all the credit in the world. But there is a whole other side to that. See, I don't believe that suicide only happens in our minds. Suicide also happens in our hearts. We need to continue to embrace the voices of lived experience so that we can continue the potential of creating a new experience. And therein lies our balance. If we take this approach of allowing ourselves to create a new experience from a different perspective, maybe that's how each of us can find our own angel in the marble, our own balance in the chaos, and experience the beauty of becoming. Thank you very much.